and this was a book that was studied after the student had studied grammar. Historically, you had a hierarchy of knowledge, and knowledge is built on other knowledges. So you move from what's known to what's unknown. You need building blocks. So you need a ladder to move up in those degrees. And grammar is basically learning how language functions at the most basic level. So we learn how to read sentences, how to understand. When we communicate, we use a lot of things. Obviously, humans speak naturally, and we don't need to be literate to communicate. Language, many Aboriginal peoples, they speak without any literacy, and they have their languages, we now know, their languages are as sophisticated and sometimes more sophisticated than modern languages. So Aboriginal languages are actually as complex as the languages that we're speaking, and sometimes they actually have more words to express things. But Aboriginal languages tend to be, even though they have abstractions, because the nature of language is abstraction, you can't have language without abstraction, they tend not to be philosophical languages. They're not languages that have the type of thinking that develops in literate civilizations. So as a civilization becomes more literate, it develops ways of understanding, because what happens is introspection. And so as a people develop intellectually, they begin to reflect on things in a way that primitive peoples or Aboriginal peoples don't, which is not to say that they don't reflect. They do. They have deep reflection. They have religions. They have ways of looking at the world that are profound. And there's immense wisdom in Aboriginal traditions, and people who have had the experience of being with Aboriginal peoples will know that they're not, it's a different way of being than the way of settled peoples and peoples that live in complex societies, because Aboriginal peoples live in very simple societies. So logic is one of those sciences that developed in a complex society. Grammar is the analysis of language, and then it's the articulation of what's been analyzed. So for instance, all human beings speak with nouns. It doesn't matter what you call a noun. You can call it a noun, you can call it an ism, like in Arabic you have ism, you have damir, which is a type of noun, what we call a pronoun in English. All languages have these methods, and this is the analysis of linguists when they go into to try to understand language. They look, and there's a theory of Chomsky, who's a great linguist in the United States, about this underlying grammar that exists, this universal grammar. That's actually the early Muslim grammarians were very much aware of that. And they discuss these issues about the nature of language. You'll also find these discussions in the scholastic tradition, but much of the scholastic tradition was taken out of the Muslim tradition because of the influence of Al-Farabi, of Ibn Sina, of Ibn Rushd, of Ghazali, and others on their discourse. But they looked and they attempted to understand the very nature of language. What is the nature of language? And language is Ar-Rahman, خلق الإنسان, right? Ar-Rahman, علم القرآن, خلق الإنسان, علمه البيان. That the merciful, he taught the Quran, he created the human being, and then gave the human being bayan. And bayan is the ability to yubayyinu ma fi nafsihi, to articulate what's in his soul. It's the ability to actually speak what is in your heart. And what is that? Does language precede meaning, or does meaning precede language? In other words, do we need language to express meaning, or is language the result of a pre-existent meaning? And our scholars argued on the side of meaning, that meaning precedes language. Al-ma'ani qabla al-mabani. Meanings precede the vehicles of meaning. And when you get into aqidah, there's huge discussions about what is the nature of kalam Allah. Is it the meanings, or is it the uncreated meanings, or is it the actual vehicle for those meanings? Or is it both, but from different perspectives? These are long debates in that tradition. So the analysis of language is an analysis that can be done to any language in the world. Every language has grammar. Darija has grammar. If you look at Darija or Ebonics in the United States, we have a type of a common language amongst a minority community in the United States that they speak and they understand, and it moves, it evolves, it changes, but it has a grammar, and it can be analyzed. Creole has a grammar. Pidgin languages have grammars. Every language has a grammar. There are certain languages that are profound civilizational languages. And these languages, because of the nature of their traditions, a certain continuity takes place. So Sanskrit is one of those languages. Chinese is one of those languages. The Hebrew language, the Arabic language, these are ancient languages. And in those languages are embedded profound worldviews. If you study the Chinese language, in the ideograms, there are literally cosmologies that are articulated in their ideograms. So you can analyze them. If you look at Hebrew, the same is true. There are cosmologies embedded. I'll give you one example. If you look at the word for human being in Arabic, the word that means human, that's shared by male and female, is called insan. And many of the philologists argue that there's not a plural. Some of them say that insanatun is a feminine form. But most say insan is like mensch. It includes the male and the female. Insan, the meaning of insan comes from uns, which is intimacy. That the human is an intimate creature. It needs to have intimacy to survive. If it doesn't have intimacy, it dries up and dies as a creature. It needs to have uns. And then it's also the same word, insan, is the word for pupil of the eye. So the insan, the bu'bu, the insan is the pupil of the eye. And one of the things that we know that when people are experiencing intimacy, the pupil dilates. It opens up. So there's an opening of the insan, that humans, when they're experience intimacy, they open up. They get inshirah. They expand. And the highest intimacy is intimacy with the divine. That the intimacy of al-uns billah, to have intimacy with the divine. And this is the greatest expansion, the inshirah that occurs. So another, just to show you the cosmology embedded in Arabic, another word for eye is ayn. Now ayn means essence. It means the source. It's also used for a spring. An ayn is the life-giving for the Arabs. The ayn of water is the life-giving source. And so there's something embedded in that understanding that indicates that the eye, the secret of the eye, of seeing, that it's related to the essence of man, that we were actually created for mushahada. We're created for witnessing. Like our existence is there to witness the divine. And that's why the essence of the human being is shahada, which means witnessing. Shahada is witnessing. So Ainul Insan, the eye of the human being and the essence of the human being, is for shahada. It's to witness. So this is the nature of that. You can get into that. Now, when you study grammar, you find that there's basically two concepts in grammar. There's the concept of substance, and there's the concept of time. Substance is articulated through quality and quantity, through adjectives, through nouns, adverbs. These all tell us the quality of something. He ran swiftly. So swiftly is telling us something about the nature of the running. But running is time. Verbs are in time. So you have time and you have place. Right? This is, the human being has two orientations. Orientation to time and place. Right? So when a physician wants to look at a student, they ask them, a patient, they want to orient them to time and place. So they'll say, who's the president? And then they'll say, where are you? And then they know that they're in their right mind because they have that orientation. That's language, time and place. That's language, and that's what makes us human. Now, the other thing about language is rational. That when we speak, we have to follow an order. Table, sky, reason, nature, blue, elevate, wonderful, know, when. See, if I start talking like that, those are all words, but there's no order to them. They were just coming off the top of my head, and you aren't understanding. Each one of those words can convey a comprehension. I know what sky is. He said sky. I know what that is. But you don't know what I'm saying or what I mean because there was no order. So there is a logic to language, and that logic is expressed through syntax. I have to have an order to my language. And in our language, for instance, in English, there is a certain type of order. We have subject, we have verb, right? We have object, right? John hit. I'm going to use the Arab, because when we were kids, we learned, Dick sees Jane. Like when I was a kid, they probably don't even do that. They don't even teach grammar anymore. But in the Arab world, I told them that you're not going to get rid of violence in the Arab world until you change the way you teach grammar. Because they always teach ضرب زيد عمرا. That's how every sentence, that the first sentence you learn in Arabic grammar is Zayd hit Amr. And you're just like, what's up with that? Why is Zayd hitting him? Why couldn't he do something else to him? Zayd, ra'a Amran. He saw Amran. But they have the darb. They have to have the darb, right? So that is, language it follows a pattern. And when you learn a language, one of the hard things about learning a foreign language is that it doesn't often have the same patterns that you have, and it can be confusing. So in Arabic, if I said akala kusa Musa, right? Did I mean the courgette ate Moses, or did I mean Moses ate the courgette? I can't tell because they're both maqsoor, right? They have the alif maqsoora, so I don't know. But if I know, and that's why you shouldn't do that, because it's mubham, it's an ambiguous. You should. That's a time where you should put the fa'il first, right, and then the maf'ul bihi after in grammar. So you should really say akala Musa kusa. But if you know reason, it's not reasonable that the courgette ate Musa. But there's somebody can be called. There was a minister, I think, from Lebanon. Is Sheikh Jamal here? Didn't they have Minister Musa Kusa? He was in Libya, Musa Kusa. Yeah. I mean, that's a father with a sense of humor, right? Yeah. So anyway. So language, now the nature of language is it's ambiguous. Language is ambiguous because you can say things and they can be taken in different ways, right? We have what in English we call double entendres, right? That you can say something and you can mean different things with it. And even our tone, like there's certain languages that tone is very important. Like Chinese, you have different tones. In English, we use tone to accent things. Yeah, he's smart, isn't he? You know, that's very different from saying, wow, he's smart, isn't he? A completely different statement, even though it's the same words, but the tone conveys something. So this is the nature of language. But language is also clear. And the clearer a language is, the better we understand it. So people say that he's very unclear in his thinking. He's muddled in his thinking. I can't understand him. What's he talking about? And teachers will tell you that. You need more clarity in your writing, things like this. So this is part of it. Now what logic does is it helps you to understand better what you naturally do. Everybody is using logic. And that was the meaning of that story. When the student comes back after the third time from the marketplace, oh my God, Ustad, it's unbelievable. Everybody's using logic. He finally got it. And that's what you see in the world. And it doesn't matter where you go. Logic is not a Western concept. What Aristotle did, and it's interesting that we're in Turkey and we're studying this because Aristotle was from Turkey. I mean, it was part of the, Asia Minor, and it was part of the Greek. But he lived on the Asian side. So he was actually, from, and he died here. But what he did, I mean, there's a debate about what he did. And we'll get to that when I do the Mabadi. So my point is that when you study logic, what you're studying is really what you do naturally. In the same way that when you study grammar, you're studying what you do naturally, which is you speak grammatically. You might make grammatical mistakes in your language. I ain't gonna go there. Or I have a friend, he's very educated, but he uses double negatives all the time, right? And he's got he's a PhD candidate, and I correct him because they just, when I hear a double negative, it's like ouch. But a double negative is a positive, right? So you're actually saying the opposite of what you think you're saying. So I ain't gonna not go there, right? So people use language and they can misuse language. And the same is true in reasoning. And that's why you learn grammar to protect your tongue from making mistakes. You learn logic to guard your reasoning so that your reasoning skills are better, but also so that you can see the arguments of others and be able to criticize them. Does that make sense? Now, one of the things about our tradition that's very important, because we have maratib al-ulum, we believe in the degrees of knowledge. In the same way that you have Newtonian physics and quantum physics. They're very different, right? Newtonian physics and quantum physics are two completely different physics. Quantum physics, all of the Newtonian laws break down in quantum mechanics. But quantum physics has been observed. So they know that underlying this Newtonian world that we live in, there's another reality, which is quantum. And they don't fully understand it, and they're trying to work out really what's going on. But the quantum world is very weird. For instance, in the quantum world, you can be in two places at one time. In the Newtonian world, you can't. You can only be in one place at one time. In a quantum world, you could walk through a wall. In a Newtonian world, you can't. So, for those of you who had the unfortunate experience of seeing The Matrix, The Matrix was somebody who was learning to work in a quantum world, right? I mean, that's really what was happening to him, was that he was learning to work in the quantum world where the laws of physics that are Newtonian don't apply. So bullets won't kill you in that world, but in a Newtonian world they will. And so one of the things that's important for us to understand is that this logic works on one level of existence. But there are other levels of existence where this logic completely breaks down. And one of the interesting things about the Western tradition is that they've never been able to really deal with these degrees of knowledge. And so they end up denying certain types of realities because they don't fit in to other types of realities. And they have a lot of problems in their philosophy because of this. Whereas the Muslims have always understood that Sharia and Haqiqah are two very important concepts in our tradition. You have a Sharia and you have a Haqiqah. If you look in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, there's a hadith where Moses and Adam have a debate. And when Moses meets Adam, Musa alayhi salam meets Adam, he says, you're the one, aghwayta nas. You led us astray, right? In other words, it's your fault that this whole mess has happened. And so he's talking, that's the logic of Aristotle. That's where Musa alayhi salam was working at that level. When he made that statement, it's like a judge in a court case. You broke the law, and then there were these repercussions, right? Adam alayhi salam, his response was, to go from the Newtonian world into the quantum world. And he said, you're Moses, you're Musa, you're the one that God bestowed all this knowledge on and gave you all this wisdom. Are you going to blame me for something? قُدِّرَ عَلَيَّ قَبْلَ أَنْ أُخْلَقْ أَتَلُومُنِي? Are you going to blame me for something that was decreed for me before I came into existence? And in another riwayah, that's not in the Muwatta, the Prophet said, Adam defeated Moses in the argument because he was using another logic. He wasn't using the logic of the courtroom, of the Sharia. He was using another logic. And so that's important for us when we go into this to understand that this is the logic of the Newtonian world. It's not the logic of the quantum world. It's the logic of the Newtonian world. But it is the logic that our Sharia is based on, that every rational system of law in the world is based on. When you go into a court of law, you are going into a court that relies entirely on logical arguments. And what lawyers do is they argue. Now, if the judge or the jury is not trained in logic, then they're susceptible to logical fallacies. Appeal to pity is a type of safsata. Appeal to pity. So they'll give a sob story that'll make these people feel all this compassion. That's actually a logical fallacy to do that. Now, sometimes it's important, but that's not an argument to do that. That's not an argument that holds up against these rigorous standards of argumentation. Or they'll use other types of fallacies. Poisoning the well is a logical fallacy. And if people aren't trained to identify these arguments, or they'll say, A, therefore B, but it's a non sequitur, it doesn't follow. But if somebody's not trained to see that, one of the great Chrysippus, who was a great early logician, he said he noted that even animals use logic, because he was walking once and he saw a rabbit turn a corner, and there was 3 roads, and it went down a road, and then a hound was chasing it, and it came around and it couldn't see the rabbit anymore, so it sniffed the first road and then went to the second, sniffed the second, and without sniffing the third, it just went down the third. So Chrysippus derived from that the dog was using logic, because it was either A, B, or C. If not A or B, then C. But it did it intuitively. And so this is the, this is the study of logic. It's why it's important. You cannot, one of the most important aspects of democracy is that democracy is a type of government that is saying that instead of using might to impose our will, we're going to use argument. That we make cases. So you will have, somebody will try to legislate a law, and he'll give arguments. And then those people listening to it will either be convinced or not convinced. For instance, if they're going to go to war, people will give arguments. If you remember, in the United States, before the Iraqi war, what did they do? They made all these arguments for why they were going to go to war. Why? Because they're saying we have to use reason. But if people aren't trained in analyzing arguments, they can be manipulated and fooled and tricked into doing things that are dangerous and harmful and destructive.